"Old man, you gonna move or you gonna make me move you?" The voice was young, thick with the kind of unearned confidence that mistakes arrogance for strength. It cut through the low morning murmur of the corner booth diner, the clink of ceramic on saucer, the sizzle of bacon on the flat top. That was the first thing Arthur Vance noticed, the disruption of a rhythm he had known for 32 years. The second thing he noticed was the hand, resting casually on the butt of a holstered pistol, performative. He looked up from his newspaper, the cheap newsprint smelling of ink and history. Three young men sauntered over his table. The one who had spoken was in the middle, broad-shouldered in a tight polo shirt that strained at the biceps. A small silver auxiliary officer's badge was clipped to his belt, next to the gun. He had the soft, entitled face of someone who had never been told no. A few feet away, a handful of patrons had stopped eating, forks hovering midair. The waitress, a girl named Brenda with kind eyes and tired feet, froze behind the counter, a coffee pot in her hand. Phones were beginning to rise, small black rectangles catching the fluorescent light. Arthur Vance did not move. He did not flinch. He simply held the young man's gaze. His own hands remained on the table, one resting on the newspaper, the other wrapped around a now cool mug of black coffee. He was a man of 68, his face a roadmap of a life lived with purpose, his hair a close-cropped crown of silver. He sat with a ramrod straight posture that seemed carved from the vinyl of the booth. What the young man, Kyle Brennan, didn't know was that he wasn't just talking to an old man in a diner. He was talking to Command Sergeant Major Arthur Vance, retired. A man who had advised generals, who had walked point in jungles that had tried to swallow him whole, who had faced down threats far colder and more final than a police chief's son with a chip on his shoulder. He was talking to a man who understood precisely what was about to happen and what would need to happen next. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. 3 days earlier, the morning had begun the same way it always did. The digital clock on his nightstand read 4:30 a.m. in silent red digits. Arthur swung his legs out of bed, careful not to wake his wife, Sarah. The floorboards were cool beneath his feet. He moved through the quiet dark of his own home with a familiar economy of motion. In the kitchen, the smell of yesterday's dinner, a rosemary chicken, still lingered faintly. He started the coffee maker, the gurgle and hiss a gentle start to the day's soundtrack. He had learned a long time ago that control began with the small things. The routine was not a cage, it was armor. 21 days of leave remaining. He wasn't on leave from the army, not anymore. He was on summer break from the university where he taught history. But he still counted the days. He still thought of them as leave, a period of rest before the next engagement. By 5:15 a.m. he was out the door. The air in the small Ohio town of Northwood was cool and damp with pre-dawn dew. Streetlights cast cones of lonely yellow onto empty sidewalks. He walked his usual 3-mile route, a path he had paced for decades, past the town square with its sleeping Civil War monument, past the high school where the football field lights were dark sentinels, past the quiet houses where his neighbors and former students slept. He walked not for exercise but for rhythm. Left, right, breathed. The world made sense on these walks. It was orderly, predictable. His final stop was always the corner booth. It was a place unstuck in time, with its red vinyl seats cracked like old leather, its chrome-edged tables, and its jukebox that hadn't played a new song since 1988. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was usually there, a man even older than Arthur, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had wiped down the same counters for 50 years. "Morning, Sergeant Major." Mr. Henderson's voice was a gravelly whisper. He never called him Professor Vance. To him, Arthur was, and always would be, the Sergeant Major. "Morning, Henry." Arthur slid into his usual booth, the one in the far corner that gave him a view of the entire room and the street outside. It was a habit forged in places where seeing what was coming was the difference between life and death. Brenda brought his coffee without asking. Black, no sugar. She topped it off and slid a menu onto the table, though he never looked at it. 2 eggs over easy bacon wheat toast. It was the same order every time. "Working on the big speech, Professor?" she asked, tucking her order pad into her apron. Arthur nodded, taking a sip of the hot, bitter coffee, the keynote for the Academy reunion, trying to find the right words. "You always do," she said with a genuine smile, and moved off to another table. He spread his newspaper out. He read it from back to front, sports to world news. It was another ritual, a way of approaching the world's chaos from a place of structured leisure. The diner slowly filled around him. The construction crew from the new development project, their boots caked with mud. A few nurses from the night shift at the hospital, their faces etched with fatigue. A young mother trying to coax her toddler into eating pancakes. The quiet hum of an ordinary town waking up. This was the peace he had fought for. Not a grand abstract peace, but this, the simple, unexamined freedom to drink coffee and read a newspaper in a corner booth. A dignity that was supposed to be non-negotiable. He was halfway through an article about municipal bonds when the bell over the diner door jingled with a dissonant clang. Kyle Brennan and 2 of his friends swaggered in. They were not the usual morning crowd. They brought a different energy into the room, loud and jarring. Kyle was the son of Police Chief Frank Brennan, a fact he wore like a second badge. He was an auxiliary officer, a volunteer position that gave him a uniform and a sense of power but little actual authority. Yet in Northwood, the distinction was meaningless. He was the chief's son, and that was authority enough. They took a table near the front, their laughter too loud, their jokes crude. Brenda's smile became fixed and professional as she took their order. Arthur kept his eyes on his paper, a familiar tension coiling in his gut. He had seen boys like Kyle Brennan all his life, in all kinds of uniforms. Boys who mistook their father's power for their own. Boys who saw the world as a thing to be conquered, not shared. After a few minutes, Kyle pushed his chair back, his eyes scanning the room. They landed on Arthur's corner booth. A smirk played on his lips. He said something to his friends, and they snickered. Then he started walking toward Arthur. Step, step, step. Arthur counted them. 7 steps from his table to Arthur's, each one an escalation. Arthur calmly folded his newspaper in half, placing it beside his plate. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. His hands were where they could be seen. His movements were small and measured. He had learned a long time ago that in moments like these, stillness was a form of strength. Kyle stopped at the edge of the table, his shadow falling over Arthur's plate. He didn't speak to Arthur at first. He spoke to the room. "This is the best booth. We want this booth." His friends laughed. No one else did. The silence that followed lasted about 5 seconds. It was heavy, thick, with a shared, unspoken understanding of what was happening. Then, Kyle looked down at Arthur, his gaze dismissive, contemptuous. He gestured with his thumb. "Time to go, Pops. We need the space." Arthur met his eyes. His voice was even, calm, devoid of any emotion but a quiet firmness. "I'm not finished with my breakfast, son." The word son seemed to flick a switch behind Kyle's eyes. It was not said with condescension, but with the simple authority of an elder. And Kyle could not stand it, the kind of disrespect that felt like a physical blow. "What did you just call me?" Kyle's voice dropped. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table, crowding Arthur's space. The smell of cheap cologne and chewing tobacco washed over him. "I believe my breakfast is getting cold," Arthur said, his eyes not leaving Kyle's. He was not asking a question, he was stating a fact. That was when Kyle's face twisted into a sneer. He looked at Arthur, at his silver hair, his warm but clean jacket, his dark skin. And in that look was the casual contempt of a man who saw not a decorated soldier, not a respected professor, not a pillar of his community, but something less. An obstacle. "Old man, you gonna move or you gonna make me move you?" The threat hung in the air. Arthur saw the scene with a strange clarity. Brenda, her face pale with fear. Mr. Henderson, his hand reaching for the phone behind the counter. The young student in the booth across the way, her thumb hovering over the record button on her phone. He saw the whole chain of events spooling out before him. He made a decision. He would comply physically while asserting his rights verbally. He began to slide out of the booth. "There's no need for threats," he said, his voice still level. "I'm leaving." But it was too late. The compliance was not what Kyle wanted. He wanted submission. He wanted a show. As Arthur stood, Kyle shoved him. Not hard, but enough to make him stumble. It was a petty, childish act of dominance. Arthur caught his balance. He looked at Kyle, and for the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. "You have no right to put your hands on me. I got all the right I need," Kyle spat, tapping the badge on his belt. And then, before Arthur could say another word, Kyle drew back his fist and punched him. The blow landed high on his cheekbone, a starburst of white-hot pain. The force of it knocked him sideways. He fell, not with a crash, but with a heavy, undignified thud against the checkered linoleum floor. His glasses skittered away, coming to rest near the leg of a table. The diner, which had been quiet, became utterly silent, a vacuum of sound. Lying on the floor, the smell of stale coffee and grease in his nostrils. Arthur felt the pain in his face. But that wasn't the primary feeling. The primary feeling was a profound, chilling clarity. A line had been crossed. A contract had been broken. The peace he had so carefully cultivated, the peace he had earned in fields of fire, had been violated in a greasy spoon diner over a corner booth. He heard Kyle's friend laugh nervously. "Dude, what did you do?" He heard Kyle's voice, full of false bravado. "He was aggressive. He was threatening me. You all saw it." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment. He took one slow breath in. He held it for 4 counts. He let it out for 8. A technique he had taught to young soldiers facing their first firefight. Center yourself. Assess the situation. Do not react. Act. He opened his eyes and looked up. The student Maya was standing now, her phone held steady, its small red light glowing like a single watchful eye. She had it all. That was the first piece. The wail of a siren started in the distance, growing closer. Of course, someone had called the police to report a crime, Arthur knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones like a winter chill, that the police were not coming to help him. They were coming to help the man who had just assaulted him. The machine was starting to grind. 2 uniformed Northwood police officers entered the diner, their movements hesitant. They were young. One of them, Officer Miller, looked barely out of his teens. His eyes darted from Kyle Brennan, standing puffed up and indignant, to Arthur, slowly pushing himself into a sitting position on the floor. Officer Miller's partner, a more senior officer named Davis, took the lead. His eyes met Kyle's, and a subtle, almost imperceptible nod was exchanged. "What's going on here, Kyle?" Davis asked, his tone more like a concerned uncle than an officer arriving at an assault scene. "This guy," Kyle said, hooking a thumb toward Arthur. He got belligerent, refused to leave. "Got in my face, started threatening me. I had to defend myself. The lie was so blatant, so audacious. It hung in the air like smoke." Arthur could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, the eyes of his neighbors, of the people who had watched him drink his coffee in this same booth for 3 decades. He could feel their fear, their reluctance to speak up against the chief's son. Arthur found his glasses and slowly, deliberately put them back on. One of the lenses was cracked. He got to his feet, his body aching less from the fall and more from the sheer weight of the injustice. "That is not what happened," he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. "This young man demanded my table. When I refused, he assaulted me." Officer Davis turned to Arthur, his expression hardening. "Sir, I need you to calm down." "I am calm, officer." Arthur's composure was unshakable. "I am the victim of an assault, and I wish to press charges," Davis sighed. A performative display of weary patience. "We'll get to that. First, I need to see some ID." Arthur produced his wallet, handing over his driver's license. Davis took it, barely glancing at it before turning his attention back to Kyle. He spoke in a low voice, but Arthur's hearing was still sharp. "Your dad's on his way, the machine." Its gears were turning, meshing together to protect one of its own. Officer Miller, the younger cop, looked deeply uncomfortable. He kept glancing at Arthur, then at Maya, who was still recording, though she had lowered her phone slightly. Miller knew what was happening was wrong. Arthur could see it in the tightness around his jaw, the way he avoided making eye contact. That was the second piece, a crack in the wall. A few minutes later, a black sedan with official plates pulled up outside. Police Chief Frank Brennan stepped out. He was a big man, running to fat, with a face that seemed permanently flushed. He moved with the heavy, deliberate swagger of a man who owned the town and everyone in it. He strode into the diner, his eyes taking in the scene in a single sweeping glance. He ignored Arthur completely. "Kyle, you okay?" he asked his son. "I'm fine, Dad. This guy was causing trouble." Chief Brennan finally turned his attention to Arthur. His eyes were small, cold chips of blue. He looked at the cut on Arthur's cheek, the cracked glasses, the dignity that still clung to him like a second skin, and he saw none of it. He saw only a problem to be managed. "What's your side of it?" the chief asked, the question a mere formality. Arthur recounted the events. Calmly and precisely, he used no emotional language. He stated facts. "Your son demanded my table. I declined. He pushed me. He then struck me in the face. I was sitting on the floor when your officers arrived." Chief Brennan listened, his expression unchanging. When Arthur was finished, he turned to the room. "Anybody else see what happened?" A heavy silence fell. Brenda looked at the floor. The construction workers suddenly became very interested in their check. No one spoke. The fear was a tangible thing, thicker than the greasy air. "All right," the chief said, a note of finality in his voice. He turned to Officer Davis. "Take statements." "Looks like a simple misunderstanding that got out of hand. Mutual combat." "That is not what happened," Arthur repeated, his voice still level. "It was an unprovoked assault. There is a witness," he said, nodding slightly in Maya's direction, "who recorded the entire incident." The chief's eyes flicked to Maya. For a second the girl flinched, but she held his gaze. The chief's face tightened. "An illegal recording? Most likely. We'll deal with that later." He turned back to Arthur. "Listen, friend, I think the best thing for everyone is we just let this go. No report, no fuss. You go home, ice your face. Kyle goes home, we all forget about it. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. A command backed by the full weight of the town's power structure. Give up, go away, know your place." Arthur felt the anger then. Not a hot, explosive anger, but a cold, deep, and ancient rage. It was the rage of his father, who had been called boy by men half his age. It was the rage of his ancestors, who had been bought and sold and told their lives had no value. It was a righteous anger, held in check by a lifetime of discipline. He let himself feel it for exactly 60 seconds. He let it wash over him, acknowledging its power. Then, he caged it. He would use it not as a fire, but as fuel. "No, Chief Brennan," Arthur said, his voice ringing with a new and formidable authority. "We will not be letting this go. I was assaulted by your son. I am a citizen, I have rights, and I expect you to do your duty." A murmur went through the diner. No one talked to Chief Brennan like that. The chief's face darkened, the flush deepening to a dangerous purple. For a moment Arthur thought the man might swing at him, just as his son had, but the chief's violence was more subtle. He smirked, a cruel, dismissive twist of his lips. "Your rights," he chuckled, a low, ugly sound. He took a step closer to Arthur, invading his personal space. "Let me tell you something about your rights. Around here I decide what they are." He turned to Officer Davis. "Write him a ticket for disorderly conduct. He's lucky I don't run him in for assaulting an officer." The absurdity of the charge was breathtaking. Davis hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Yes, Chief, they wrote the ticket." The flimsy piece of paper, an official seal on the morning's injustice. Chief Brennan clapped his son on the shoulder and led him out of the diner, a king protecting his prince. As they left, Kyle glanced back at Arthur, a triumphant, hateful smirk on his face. Arthur stood alone in the middle of the diner, the ticket in his hand. The other patrons began to stir, their relief at the departure of the Brennans mixed with shame. Brenda came over, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "Professor Vance, I am so sorry." "It's not your fault, Brenda," he said softly. Mr. Henderson approached, his old face a mask of grim resolve. He placed a hand on Arthur's arm. "Come in the back, son. Let me get you some ice for that." In the small, cluttered office behind the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of onions and old paper, Mr. Henderson tended to Arthur's face. The old man's hands were surprisingly gentle. "I saw it all." "Arthur," he said, his voice low, "heard it all. They've been doing this for years, the father, the son. They think they own this place. I know. Henry." Mr. Henderson looked at him, his eyes sharp and clear. What they don't know, he said, is who they're dealing with. He walked over to a large, dusty filing cabinet in the corner. He unlocked it with a key from the chain on his belt. I'm old. I don't have much fight left in me, but I'm a good record keeper. He pulled out a thick, worn ledger. The cover was simple black cardboard. He opened it on the small desk. The pages were filled with neat, spidery handwriting, dates, names, incidents. Started this 10 years ago, Mr. Henderson said. Every time Frank Brennan or one of his deputies roughed someone up for no reason. Every time Kyle got into a fight and his dad made it go away. Every complaint that got lost at the station, I wrote it down. Got statements when I could. Had a few of them notarized. He turned a page. Here, 2016. Kyle Brennan, hit and run on Elm Street. Witness was a kid named Torres. Chief Brennan visited the family. Next day, the witness couldn't remember a thing. He turned another page. 2019. Chief Brennan himself, a domestic call. Man ended up with a broken arm. Said he fell down the stairs. His wife told me different. It was a meticulous, damning record of corruption and abuse. A box of evidence patiently compiled over a decade of quiet observation. This was the third piece. Arthur looked at the ledger, at the years of pain and fear documented in Henry Henderson's careful script. This wasn't just about a punched cheek in a diner anymore. It was about this book. It was about all the names in it. He felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders, not as a burden but as a mantle. As he was leaving the diner, Maya, the student, was waiting for him outside. She was twisting the strap of her backpack, her young face a mixture of fear and determination. Professor Vance, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I got it, the whole thing, on my phone. Arthur looked at her. She was one of his students, a bright kid from a Civil War to Civil Rights seminar. He saw the risk she was taking. They'll come for it, you know, he said gently. The chief. He'll try to intimidate you. She swallowed hard but nodded. I know. What should I do? Arthur thought for a moment. He could take the phone, but that would put the evidence in one place. He needed it to be safe. More than that, he needed her to be a part of this. He needed to empower her, not just use her evidence. Hold on to it, Maya, he said. Don't post it. Don't show it to anyone. Email a copy to a private account that no one knows about. And then I need you to trust me. The process will be slow, but it will be thorough. Can you do that? She looked into his eyes, searching for something. She must have found it because her own expression firmed with resolve. Yes, sir, I can. Good, he said. Now go to class. And be careful. He watched her walk away, a small, brave figure against the backdrop of a town that had just tried to crush her voice. Arthur drove home, the cracked lens of his glasses creating a spiderweb fracture in the world. When he walked in the door, Sarah was waiting. She was a retired nurse, a woman with a calm and competence that matched his own. She took one look at his face, and her expression, usually so warm, became sharp with concern. Arthur, what happened? He didn't need anyone to tell him what had happened. She saw it. He sat at the kitchen table while she cleaned the cut, her touch gentle but efficient. He told her everything, from Kyle's swagger to the chief's dismissal to Mr. Henderson's ledger. He spoke in the same measured tones he had used in the diner. When he was done, she finished taping a small bandage to his cheek. She put the first aid kit away. She washed her hands. Then she came back to the table, sat across from him, and took his hands in hers. Her hands were warm, strong, the hands that had held him, healed him, and anchored him for 45 years. She didn't say, let it go. She didn't say, be careful. She looked him in the eye and said 4 simple words. What's the first step? That was the only question that mattered. The family anchor was secure. The first step was a phone call. He went into his study, a room lined with books on history, strategy, and law. He closed the door. He sat behind his large oak desk, the surface of which was neat and orderly. He pulled out a small leather-bound address book. He flipped through the pages until he found the number he was looking for. It was a Washington, D.C. exchange. He dialed. It rang 3 times before a crisp professional voice answered. Rostova, Eva, it's Arthur Vance. There was a pause, and then the voice warmed considerably. Sergeant Major, it's been too long. To what do I owe the honor? Colonel Eva Rostova had been a young JAG captain when she first served with Arthur. He had been her senior enlisted advisor. He had taught her the difference between what the regulations said and how the world actually worked. She was now a senior attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, the professional ally. I need your help, Colonel, he said. Or, more accurately, my town does. He spent the next 20 minutes laying out the situation with the same precision he had used with Sarah. He told her about the assault, the police response, the history of abuse, the ledger, and the video. He left nothing out. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. He could hear her breathing, could practically picture her sitting in a sterile government office, a thoughtful, dangerous expression on her face. Sergeant Major, she said finally, her voice now cold and hard as steel, what you've described is not just an assault. It's a pattern and practice of color of law violations. It's a conspiracy to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights. I'm aware, Colonel. Send me the student's name and contact information. Send me the diner owners. Do not engage with the local police any further. Do not talk to anyone else about this. An investigative team will be on a plane tomorrow morning. We will handle it from here. Thank you, Eva. No. Sergeant Major, she said, and he could hear the old respect, the deep loyalty in her voice. Thank you. Some people just take the punch. You decided to build a case. He hung up the phone. The counterattack had begun. He had 20 days of leave remaining. He figured that would be more than enough time. The next few days were a study in strategic patience. Arthur followed his routine, the 4:30 a.m. wake-up, the walk, the coffee at home, not the diner for now. He worked on his keynote address. He and Sarah had quiet dinners. To an outside observer, it would have looked like nothing had changed, that he had accepted the injustice and moved on. But beneath the surface, the machine of federal justice was beginning to turn. He received a text from Maya. Some guy in a uniform came by my dorm. Asked a lot of questions about my classes. Said I matched the description of someone involved in a cheating scandal. It was weird. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Vague, deniable, meant to frighten her into silence. Arthur called Ava Rostova and reported it. Good, Rostova said. That's witness tampering. Add it to the list. The next day, Arthur was pulled over while driving to the grocery store. It was Officer Davis, the senior cop from the diner. He claimed Arthur had run a stop sign. Arthur had not. He accepted the ticket without argument, his hands on the steering wheel where Davis could see them. He noted the time, the location, and the badge number. He saw the flicker of frustration in Davis's eyes when Arthur refused to be baited into an argument. He called Rostova and reported the retaliatory traffic stop. Harassment under color of law, she said, her voice grim. They're building our case for us, Sergeant Major. Just keep your head down. My people are on the ground. They're being discreet. He didn't see them, but he could feel their presence, a new energy in the town. Strangers in suits, asking quiet questions. They visited Mr. Henderson, who spent 4 hours with them, his ledger open on the table between them. They met with Maya, not at her dorm, but in a quiet corner of the university library. An FBI forensics expert made a perfect court-admissible copy of the video from her phone. The pressure on Chief Brennan was mounting, but he didn't know where it was coming from. He doubled down. His son, Kyle, started openly bragging about the incident at the diner, embellishing the story to make himself the hero. He told people Arthur had taken a swing at him first. The lie spread through the town's gossip mill. A poison meant to discredit Arthur before he could fight back. But Arthur didn't fight back, not in the way they expected. He didn't go to the local paper. He didn't complain at a town council meeting. He remained quiet, composed, and patient. His silence seemed to unnerve the Brennans more than any public outcry would have. They had expected him to shout. They were prepared for shouting. They had no idea how to handle the quiet, methodical dismantling of their corrupt little kingdom. The turning point came from a place Arthur hadn't expected. Officer Miller, the young cop who had been at the diner, had been wrestling with his conscience. He had joined the force to help people, not to be a part of a cover-up for the chief's delinquent son. The official report on the diner incident, written by Davis and approved by Brennan, was a work of fiction. It painted Arthur as the aggressor and Kyle as the victim. Miller had been ordered to sign it. He had refused. For 2 days, he was given the cold shoulder at the station. His partner, Davis, wouldn't speak to him. He was assigned to desk duty, filing old reports. He knew his career in Northwood was over. He could quit or he could be forced out, but there was a third option. He found the contact information for the FBI's regional field office. He made an anonymous call. He told them everything he had seen. He told them about the falsified report. He told them that his own body camera footage, which would have shown the truth of the exchange in the diner, had been mysteriously erased from the server by the chief himself. He was the insider, the man on the inside who had finally had enough. His testimony was the key. It corroborated Maya's video and Mr. Henderson's ledger. It provided direct evidence of a criminal conspiracy and obstruction of justice originating from the chief of police. Eva Rostova called Arthur. "We have him," she said. Her voice was calm, but underneath it he could hear the thrill of the hunt. "We have him cold." The young officer came forward. "It's all over but the paperwork." "What happens now?" Arthur asked. "Now," she said, "we stop being discreet." The next morning, 4 black SUVs, the kind that are always clean and vaguely menacing, pulled into the parking lot of the Northwood Police Department. A dozen federal agents, their jackets identifying them as FBI and DOJ, stepped out and entered the building. They were led by a stern-faced U.S. attorney and Colonel Ava Rostova, in a civilian suit that looked more formidable than any uniform. They presented Chief Frank Brennan with a federal warrant to seize all records, computers, and evidence related to the diner incident and every case listed in Mr. Henderson's ledger. The color drained from the chief's face. His bluster, his arrogance, the entire architecture of his power, crumbled in the face of an authority he could not intimidate. He tried. "You have no jurisdiction here," he sputtered. The U.S. attorney, a man with eyes that had seen every kind of lie, simply pointed to the seal on the warrant. "The United States Department of Justice has jurisdiction everywhere, Chief. Now you can cooperate, or you can be charged with obstruction of a federal investigation on top of everything else. It's your choice." Brennan deflated. The fight went out of him. He was just a small-town bully who had finally run into a bigger one, and this one had the law on its side. The agents systematically took the station apart, boxing up files, imaging hard drives. Officer Davis, when questioned, immediately tried to blame everything on the chief. Officer Miller, on the other hand, gave a calm, detailed statement, backed by his own meticulous notes. Later that afternoon, 2 U.S. Marshals arrived at Kyle Brennan's house. He answered the door in his auxiliary uniform, a smug look on his face, assuming it was more local cops coming to see him. The look vanished when the marshals presented him with an arrest warrant for assault in violation of civil rights. You can't arrest me, he said, his voice a panicked squeak. My dad's the chief of police. One of the marshals, a tall, impassive man, took the cuffs from his belt. The same kind of restraints Kyle had probably imagined putting on Arthur. The irony was thick. Your dad's a little busy right now, the marshal said. They cuffed him and walked him out to their car. He was no longer the swaggering prince of the town. He was just a scared young man in a cheap uniform, brought down by his own arrogance. The neighbors watched from their windows, the curtain of fear in Northwood finally beginning to lift. Chief Brennan was suspended, pending the federal investigation. He was indicted a week later on charges of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy. The machine had been broken. 14 days of leave remaining. The story was all over the regional news. The quiet professor who had taken down a corrupt police chief. The town of Northwood forced to confront the ugliness it had allowed to fester for so long. There were town hall meetings, calls for reform, and a new sense of possibility. Arthur stayed out of it. He had done his part. Now it was up to the community to rebuild. He went back to his routine. Back to his morning walks, and 1 week after the arrests he went back to the corner booth. He walked in, and a hush fell over the room. It was different from the silence of fear that had fallen the day of the assault. This was a silence of respect, of awe. Brenda came over, her smile genuine and bright. The usual professor? Please, Brenda. He slid into his corner booth. It was just a booth, but it felt different now. It felt earned. Mr. Henderson came out from the back and sat across from him, something he had never done before. They offered me the interim chief position, Mr. Henderson said, shaking his head with a weary smile. Can you believe that? An old man like me? They know a leader when they see one, Henry, Arthur said. I told them no, Henry replied, but I told them who they should ask. That young fella. Miller. He's got a good heart, a straight spine. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two old soldiers who had fought a different kind of war, and won. As Arthur was finishing his breakfast, a black government sedan pulled up outside. The kind of car that makes people stop and stare. The back door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out. He was tall, with the unmistakable bearing of a senior military officer. A few people in the diner gasped. They recognized him from television. It was General Marcus Thorne, the current Secretary of Defense. He entered the diner, his eyes scanning the room. They found Arthur in his corner booth. The general's stern face broke into a warm, respectful smile. He walked directly to Arthur's table. The entire diner was silent, watching. General Thorne stopped 3 feet from the table. He stood straight, his shoulders back, and then he did something that sent a shock wave through the room. He snapped to attention and delivered a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cracked glass. Sergeant Major, the general's voice boomed with respect. It's good to see you, sir. Arthur slowly stood. He returned the salute, his own movements just as crisp, a lifetime of discipline in the simple gesture. General Thorne, an unexpected pleasure. I was in the state for a base visit, the general said, dropping his salute as Arthur did. I heard what happened here. I had to come and pay my respects. You taught me everything I know about leadership, Sergeant Major. Looks like you're still giving lessons. He gestured to the seat. May I, of course, sir. The Secretary of Defense sat down in a vinyl booth in a greasy spoon diner in Northwood, Ohio, to have a cup of coffee with his former mentor. He asked about Sarah. He asked about Arthur's teaching. They spoke of old times, of shared hardships and victories in faraway lands. They didn't speak of the Brennans. They didn't need to. The general's presence was a statement more powerful than any indictment. It was a public and undeniable validation of Arthur Vance. It told the entire town, the entire world, exactly who they had underestimated. After 20 minutes, the general stood to leave. He shook Arthur's hand firmly. You ever need anything, Art, he said, his voice low and sincere. You call me, that's an order. Will do, Marcus. Arthur watched him go. The black car pulled away, leaving the town of Northwood changed in its wake. Brenda came over to refill his coffee, her hand shaking slightly. I had no idea, she stammered. Arthur just smiled. He took a sip of his coffee. The peace in the diner was real this time. It wasn't the peace of complacency. It was the peace of justice. The kind of peace that had to be fought for. He had 7 days of leave remaining. He spent them at home, finalizing his keynote address for the reunion. He sat in his study, the morning light streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah would bring him coffee, and they would sit in comfortable silence, the quiet rhythm of their life restored. He didn't write about the diner. He didn't write about the Brennans. His speech was about service, duty, and the long, slow, and often thankless work of building a more just world. It was about the quiet professionals, the record keepers, the young people with courage, and the insiders with a conscience. It was about the idea that true strength wasn't about how loud you could shout, but about how long you could endure, how carefully you could plan, and how unshakable your belief in what was right could be. On the final day of his leave, he took his morning walk. The air was crisp, hinting at the coming autumn. The town felt different, lighter. People met his eye. They nodded. Some even smiled. The fear that had hung over Northwood for so long had begun to dissipate. He walked past the corner booth. Through the large plate glass window, he could see his corner booth was occupied. Maya, the student who had filmed the assault, was sitting there. A stack of textbooks was on the table beside her, and she was highlighting a passage, her expression one of deep concentration. She happened to look up as he passed. Her eyes met his. She didn't wave. She didn't offer a big, theatrical smile. She simply gave him a small, confident nod, a nod of solidarity, a nod between two people who had seen something wrong and had, in their own ways, done something to make it right. Arthur Vance nodded back. He continued his walk, the rhythm steady and sure under his feet. Left, right, breathe. The sun was rising, casting long shadows that would soon be burned away by the morning light. The world was not perfect. It was not always just. But on that morning, in that small town, it felt a little more orderly, a little more right, and for now, that was enough. Just the road and the engine of his own 2 feet in the morning air. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.